Hello, everyone. It is Jennie and Laurie Farrington of Astropath, and today we are here to talk about the Virgo lunar eclipse. And we'll give you some information about that, and we're going to talk about that. But before we get into it, let's just say welcome to those of you who are new, and welcome back to those of you who have been listening to us for a while. We are really grateful to have you here. And we really appreciate your comments, your likes, your shares, your subscriptions. All of those good things really help us. So please do all the stuff. Below the show notes, you'll find all the information on how to reach us. We both do consultations and teaching and a lot of other things. You can find us both on our websites. I do a lot on Substack, and Jenny and I are going to be doing some new things going forward with this YouTube channel. I think we're going to be changing things. A while back, you might have heard me say that I was going to be doing a new YouTube channel on my own. I think I talked about that at one time, but that's off the table. And Jenny and I are going to be doing more stuff together and from sort of a different perspective. So look forward to that. And yeah, what else do you want to add to that, Jenny?
Well, I'm excited to do some new stuff with you, Lori, and it's really kind of going along with, some changes I'm trying to make to my writing. I write a weekly newsletter, and I'm really working right now towards just making it more practical. I always have a focus on wellness, but I'm really working to, I don't know, just bring those two things together, astrology and wellness in a different way. I've already been doing it, but I'm just tweaking it, and I think it's going to go really well with what you and I are trying to do too. So, if you're interested in that, please go to my website and sign up for my newsletter, see what I'm doing there. And I'm just in process of like developing some new workshops and things like that that are coming up, but not quite there yet. So that's it. Yeah, looking forward
Okay.
to it. Okay,
All right, now on to the eclipse.
that's
When
right.
is it? What is it? What the heck is an eclipse?
Oh, all good questions. Okay, so this is the Virgo lunar eclipse. It's happening on March 14th at 2:54 a.m. Eastern time. So that means for some of you, it's going to be happening on March 13th instead, if you're, say, in Australia or something like that. So please adjust your time zone. Yeah, we're in eclipse season. This is the beginning of, the pair of eclipses. Eclipses always come in pairs. It's always a lunar and a solar eclipse, though sometimes the solar one comes first, but it's always those two things. And the reason why is, well, a lunar eclipse always happens in a full moon. And it really speaks to that alignment between the sun, the earth, and the moon. And essentially, what's happening is the sun is casting Earth's shadow on the moon.
Mhm.
So it's again always happening at that full moon. So you get that really cool, kind of red colored moon. I might actually have to get up for this one because it's
Mhm.
if it's
Mhm.
not cloudy, just
Yeah.
tough in New England. But anyway, that's what we're looking at. A couple more dates to throw your way. We always think about these things in cycles, which we will explain a little more about. But I just want you to know that the new moon for this lunar eclipse was on February 27th at 9 degrees of Pisces. And if you're using the year-long cycles, there was a new moon on September 2nd in Virgo. So that would be, giving you a chance to think about the longer cycle.
Mhm.
So yeah, Lori, what do you want to say about the cycle itself?
The cycle itself, what do I want to say about the cycle? I'm not sure exactly
Or
what you're
something
looking.
else? Yeah.
Well, yeah, the one of the things about eclipses, I'll say, is that eclipses are very different than regular new and full moons. And because this is a lunar eclipse, like you said, it is a full moon. This is not a time, normally with full moons, we think of, oh, celebrate, full illumination, go dance around the fire. This is not a time to celebrate. This is a time to observe. That's how I think of eclipses as being very different from regular new and full moons. They're not times to take action. They're times to observe. They're times to pay attention to what's going on around you. If you've got the information of where this is happening in your life, you know where to really pay attention. Why do you want to pay attention? Well, you want to pay attention because there are big changes happening in that area of your life over the coming 6 months. Let's say 6 months, approximately. So it's not, just a moment of celebration. It's a time to observe and watch the thing play out over the next 6 months.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. And I think so the big thing we tend to focus on is because it's a lunar eclipse that's in Virgo, what we really want to look at is the traits of Virgo. What does Virgo bring in? And because it's a lunar eclipse that conjuncts the South Node, which we can show you on the chart when we open that up. But because it's that, it really is asking you to look at what are the more sort of negative and difficult traits of Virgo that might be coming up and blocking your way. Because with a South Node eclipse, you always want to be thinking about what do I need to release? What is holding me back from the past? And in Virgo, we're really looking at problems with perfectionism, problems with being overly judgmental, problems with being self-critical in a way that it completely cripples you and it makes you unable to open to the broader themes of what Pisces represents.
Mhm.
So with a Virgo lunar eclipse, we are really kind of dialing into what might some of those issues be. And then when you look at the house system and where that Virgo is landing, this Virgo lunar eclipse, then you really, just as Laurie said, you can think about the problems in your life that might be popping up from that. So it's really a self-reflection. It's not to say that Virgo is negative or that's the only thing to focus on, but it's really asking us what can we let go of that is blocking our way to flow, essentially.
It's so interesting because in recent time, I've been really aware of how, because I work with natal charts and I work with people who are, awake in their lives and moving forward. They don't contact an astrologer if they're, sitting on the couch drinking beer all day. So, I have taught myself so much to look at the positive of these things. It's always a little tricky to turn around and look at the negative. And with Virgo, Virgo's my favorite sign. It really is my absolute favorite sign. And when I think about Virgo, I think of all the wonderful things about Virgo. It's focus on being of service to others and all these higher level sides of Virgo. But like you said, with the eclipse, we've got to turn that on its head and think about the hard side, the part that people really struggle with, the rigidity of Virgo, the side of Virgo that can get really caught in over analysis and, yeah,
Mhm.
self-criticism. People talk about Virgo, when people talk about the negative side of Virgo, they talk about how critical and picky they can be. But boy, it's turned on the self more than anything. Uh,
Yeah,
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 yeah. So,
yeah.
so really pay attention to that. Where are you being really self-critical?
Yeah, and I don't know about you, Lori, but I end up having that conversation about perfectionism with lots of people, lots of clients,
Yeah.
friend conversations, that struggle with wanting things to be a very specific way and expecting them to be a certain way. And then if it's not achievable, then it becomes this source of self-flagellation. I'm going to beat myself up because I didn't make this ideal, which quite frankly was unattainable to begin with. And I know for myself, I've really had to kind of scrutinize like where that perfectionist shows up because it isn't that perfectionism, like it isn't readily obvious. It isn't necessarily the thing where you're just trying to make some piece of writing or something absolutely perfect before you're willing to show it to anyone. That's certainly one way it can manifest,
Mhm.
but I've noticed it manifesting a lot as social perfectionism, like really wanting relationships to be a certain way, or a person in your life to behave a certain way, and or even yourself to behave a certain way. And when you don't, there's this guilt and shame, and and that's kind of the darker face of
Yeah.
Virgo. But like you, I really like the Virgo sign is a great sign because it really speaks to that. Hey, there's stuff going on, and I want to help. I'm going to make a checklist. I'm going to go, those people over there need to eat. I'm going to go to the store. I'm going to buy the things. I'm going to make the soup. I'm going to bring get people to help and bring it out. And really just focus on the practicality of how to help
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
that's the really, really wonderful side of it.
Yeah.
So this whole conversation is about how do you kind of let go of those really tight areas where you're trying to hold yourself to something unreasonable, some
Right.
unreasonable standard. Unpack that a little bit so that you can open to the flow that all the Pisces represents.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of the thing, right? Something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Um, okay. Do we want to open up the chart? Are we
I think
ready
so.
for that? Okay.
Yeah.
Let's get that opened up here. And here we have it. Look at that. Woo! Got some balance issue here, don't we?
Yes. Yeah. What is the, I mean, this chart, first of all, you can't help but look at all that Pisces, and it's fairly tightly together. It's, within a sort of 7-degree realm of 22 degrees where Saturn is, and then you have the sun and the North Node, and then next to that you have Neptune at 29 degrees. So that's a pretty strong Pisces
Mm.
message
Mm.
that is being presented to us. And you can really just see, the moon is just totally the other side of the chart, obviously, because it's a full moon. And right next to that south node, the thing that kind of looks like a nose ring,
Yeah.
is the south node. So that's the two symbols together. The moon in Virgo, conjunct the south node. That's the two symbols that are sort of saying, hey, let's look at the issues of Virgo and how are we being blocked by those issues and what do we need to release or let go of. First of all, as Laurie's saying, what do we need to observe about these the difficult, challenging tendencies of Virgo, in order to release those and then turn Virgo around to be the keen, discerning, the ability to really look at a situation with practicality and decide what's the best course of action. I mean, it really, I guess in a word, it's sort of like boundaries. Like, what are those really good boundaries about which thing to not pay attention to and
Mm.
say, let's leave that off. And then
Mm.
which things do you really need to focus in on so that you can be effective and organized.
Yeah. Discernment.
Yeah.
Discernment is a really important thing. But with this lunar eclipse, moving with the south node there in Virgo, this being a south node eclipse, we have to really be looking at the Pisces and really understanding that it's so important that we allow ourselves to open that doorway and move in that direction. So we've got to talk about Pisces here. We've got to talk about what is Pisces showing us right now? What is it that is actually kind of being blocked from view by that eclipse itself? But we need to move in that direction. And Saturn's placement there is really interesting because Saturn's been going through Pisces. Really, we have been working on understanding this area for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
Um, Pisces is really about, God, it's so hard to even talk about Pisces sometimes. It's so hard because Pisces is what is intangible. In essence, there's such an intangibility about Pisces. We see it in imagination, in flow, in suffering. The bigger picture of humanity's suffering and how we are required to meet that with compassion. It's the
Mm.
only way to meet suffering
Mhm.
is compassion.
Yeah.
Not just compassion. We do need to roll up our sleeves, but before we're willing to roll up our sleeves, we have to meet it with compassion. And there's so much with the placement of this eclipse being pretty much exactly, pretty close to exactly the degree at which Venus and Mercury are going to turn direct in right now, they're retrograde or just about to be. So this is really a time of observation. The time of action is going to really click in when those planets go direct.
Yeah. Yeah, so when I look at this chart overall, I just think, and I know we've talked about these themes in both our Pisces season video and our retrogrades video we made recently, but just the idea that Pisces is really referring to endings and closing down. Like there's a dissolution feeling of Pisces where things are starting to kind of, I mean, there's an ending to it. They're sort of dispersing. And so I think a lot of what this chart is saying to us is like, what are those things that we need to do? How do we need to be in touch with compassion? How do we need to really take on board, in a sort of practical way that Virgo represents, the fact that we all are all interconnected, that we're living on one planet and there's enormous change happening right now. And the change is causing an enormous amount of grief and suffering to happen. And you can't get away from that. It's just what's happening right now. And I think that the more positive message of all of this is like coming to that understanding, coming to that understanding of how interconnected we are. And I was talking to somebody recently, and as as kind of messed up as it is, the idea that every single one of us has plastic in our bodies, in our brains, is a tangible representation of our interconnectedness,
Mm.
whether you like it or not. I mean, that's because it's in our water, it's in everything we do, it's in our water, and it's all coming to us. So, it's not sort of like there is a real spiritual, powerful cosmic energy vibe to Pisces, but there's also that simple truth. It represents water and oceans. So anything that's in our oceans is in our bodies,
Mm.
in our cells, which are 70% water.
Mm.
So there's this, these layers, that we need to look at. And the bigger message is, there's emotional sensitivity that's part of Pisces. There's caring for other people. There's having to deal with our grief. Like I certainly have a lot of grief right now with what's changing, even though I know change is necessary,
Mm.
so it is not the easiest thing to talk about, but the whole idea with this lunar eclipse is untangling the blocks that Virgo represents so we can open to this spiritual flow, that is right here beneath our noses. It's here every day. It's here in how we live and the way we connect with other people. And this is the task before us before everything goes charging into Aries. And I mean, Laura, you mentioned to me in the beginning, like you're saying a lot of what you think about this chart is that there's this kind of like fake, like, hey, we're in Aries now, just because Venus and Mercury are there, and Chiron is too. But that's not the focus. The focus is on this Pisces piece. And the Aries, the fact that Venus and Mercury are both in Aries, Mercury's going to retrograde a couple days after this, or no, the next day after this. It's saying, oh, nope, we got to go back to Pisces. So that really is the central focus. There is going to come a time when Saturn and Neptune will be in Aries as well next year, part of this year too, when that focus will be where it is. But right now, it really is on this Pisces piece, the development of compassion, the understanding of your spirituality, attuning to
Yeah.
cosmic energies, all those things.
Yeah, that's what we need to be focusing on. Right now, the Aries is the distraction. It's like all that bombastic, yeah, patriarchal crap that we're seeing with stunned eyes is a distraction from the development of empathy that we need to be developing right now in order to be able to face the day that we really do have to take action on these things, which is coming soon, but right now is a time of observation. And I just put in that trying to Mars in Cancer because, yeah, just the action of taking care of each other is so important.
Mhm.
And the I also put in the sextile to Uranus, just thinking in terms of fucking, excuse my language, stay awake.
Yeah.
Stay awake. Take care of each other. Stay awake. Embrace and develop compassion. Don't turn your eyes away. Don't turn your eyes back to, I've got to make myself perfect.
Mhm.
Turn your eyes toward compassion, taking care of other people, and I'm going to say it, staying woke.
We
Okay?
need the wokeness. Yeah. Well,
Queens of wokeness. That's what we need to title our something.
yeah. Well, also from the geeky astrology lens that I like to bring, I'd just like to point out that both of these lines you've drawn into Mars and Uranus, these are the closing ends of those things. In other words, it's the closing trine to Mars, it's the closing sextile to Uranus. So to me, this is, and then you have Pisces. This is a very important kind of final moment to really, as you said, take care of each other, to wake up to, what to me, what Uranus symbolizes is the reality of climate change. And despite, like this political chaos that's going right now, and this quite frankly naked power grab that's happening in the United States government, is also just trying to ignore the truth of the shifting climate and what the earth itself is shifting. And that is the bigger change. The political change is, yeah, like you said, the Aries just kind of like this me, moment. And that's the not the message to take on here. This isn't about me. This is the message of the bigger picture and the bigger being in flow. So I think that that's important. um, and the other just thing that we're going to mention in our individual impacts is Saturn.
Yeah.
I mean, what's Saturn's role you think, Lori?
Well, Saturn's making it, well, let's see. Because Saturn has been in Pisces since the spring of 2023, we have been faced with looking at this stuff and working with it for quite a while, working with this development of compassion if we're paying attention. This has been a part of it, depending on where it shows up in your chart. Wherever Saturn is our responsibility.
Mm,
It's our responsibility to keep our eyes open, to develop this level of deep compassion. It's also not an easy place. Saturn always, yeah, it's our responsibility. We need to face the reality. Facing reality is huge. We have to face reality, which is kind of almost the opposite of Pisces. Pisces
right.
doesn't want to face reality.
Mm,
But with Saturn going through there, we are required to face the reality of how fogged we have been,
mm,
how fogged our minds have been, how we've allowed ourselves to be where we are.
mm,
And we really, yeah, I think this is very much about moving toward our responsibility to the bigger picture.
mm.
What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I absolutely think so. And it's interesting how this chart is the sextile, the opportunity to Uranus, so I keep thinking about like part of this whole idea of spirituality, which I know is sort of a trigger word. And but really it's about our connection to this planet that we evolved on,
Mhm.
like in this much bigger scale. Like this is what we evolved into. So that's the opportunity here is about waking up to that, our heritage of that connection. And I really feel that. And then the other thing, the one thing that Saturn wants is it wants control. And it's kind of like the one thing it cannot have in Pisces is control. So that really brings in this conundrum, this interesting question around what is that saying? And part of it, what it's saying is that you've got to release the ego. I mean, there's something about the sacrifice of the ego here. So
Mhm.
there's something about being willing to say, it's not just about me, it's about
Mhm.
everything. It's about all the things.
Ah.
So there's something about that. That's really the lesson here is. And so that means that when Saturn does go into Aries, the idea is that we've done our work, we've taken responsibility for, releasing our ego and not living from the ego space, but really recognizing our profound interconnectedness, and then walking forwards into Aries with that is how you do that whole spiritual warrior thing that we were talking about before in the two retrograde videos, or the one retrograde video we made. So yeah.
That's awesome, Jenny. Something about the way you articulated that, like really, that was really great. Thank you. I personally got some big epiphany out of that for my own chart. So thank you.
Yeah. um yeah, there's a lot. I mean, Saturn's one of the teachers, right? It's really the maybe the hardest teacher in the chart.
Yeah.
So it's not easy. It's not easy to do that work.
Yeah.
Your ego wants to pop up in all these different ways, but
Yeah.
um,
It's
it's really,
fascinating.
yeah,
Fascinating. Okay. Are we ready to blast into the individual pieces or?
I think so.
Okay.
Um,
Let's go then. We're going to go to folks who have Aries rising.
all right. Okay. I'm doing fire and air first this time. So
Yes, there
let's
you
see.
go.
Oh, here we go. All right, so those of you with Aries rising, the Virgo lunar eclipse is highlighting your sixth house. And what that's really bringing to your attention is asking you to identify the habits, the routines, the practices, all of the things that you do that ultimately are about how you take care of yourself. With Virgo on the sixth house cusp, there's this real importance of taking care of your physical body, and you've got to think about how you eat. What are you putting in your body? What do you put in your body when you get up in the morning? You need to think about your sleep habits. Are you getting enough sleep? Do you need to be going to bed earlier? What are your kind of circadian rhythms here that you need to be respecting? I mean, that's where the kind of the heart of the attention is just looking at those things. And again, not looking harshly, not scolding yourself because you're not eating the right things or you ate that bag of chips yesterday or whatever. It's it's not about that. It's more about just witnessing and
Mm,
asking yourself with honesty, like, where do I need to soften and where do I need to make sure I'm really prioritizing how I take care of myself? Because otherwise, you might be getting bogged down in perfectionism and this like judgment, if it's never good enough and nothing that I ever do is good enough in terms of my daily habits. And it's really time to kind of observe that and notice that you need to release that over the course of the next 6 months.
mm.
Yeah. So that's the first little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, releasing this expectation of perfectionism in your day-to-day routines, your lifestyle. So as you're releasing that, you are observing how that release enables you to move into a softer side of yourself, a softer internal way in which you can open yourself up to an understanding of the bigger picture, the collective, to really allow yourself. It's sort of like that tightness you hold around your own routines is keeping you separate from
Mhm.
the collective, the experience of understanding what the collective is experiencing, if that made sense. But there's this way of it is really important for you to see the suffering in the world and allow yourself to feel that suffering, allow yourself to embrace the compassion that arises from that suffering. And then when the time is right, taking action on what finding your place and what you can do to take action. When the time is right, those planets turn direct and actually move into Aries, you're going to be ready to take some action.
hmm Yeah, especially as an Aries rising. I mean, you've got to just really take into account, like with Aries rising, you have that kind of pioneering or warrior type vibe, like that you walk into the room with. And so, I mean, you have a natural leadership capacity here.
Yeah.
So it's really important that you do that work. You take that Saturn lesson seriously, about, well, ultimately trusting your intuition,
Right.
removing that tightness that Lori talked about and opening to the flow of your intuition and not being afraid of feelings like grief and so on, because the thing is, it's a flow.
Mhm.
So what feels like grief in one moment or one part of your life will open to something more transcendent and imaginative in another part of
Mhm.
your life. So there's something about just trusting that the tides, that especially with Aries rising, because that, when you kind of get activated, you can really occupy that spiritual warrior place like no one else.
Yeah. And
So
right now with that, you know, yeah, as we talked about in the intro, being distracted by that big battle going on in the world right now. Just, wait. You're don't let that distract you for this period of time. There's going to be time for you to take action. It isn't quite yet. You haven't
Yeah.
softened yourself enough to do the work in a way that is going to be effective.
Yeah, it's like spiritual fortification.
That's it. That's the title. Spiritual fortification. That's what we're all doing right now is fortifying ourselves. That's beautiful. Fortifying ourselves in order to have the ability to move forward and take real effective action when the time is right.
Hmm, nice.
Beautiful. Okay, so let's move on to folks who have Taurus rising. Now, if you have Taurus rising, the focus of this lunar eclipse is in your fifth house, Virgo, fifth house. So, you want to, it's not a normal full moon. This is an eclipse. This is not a time to celebrate your creativity. It's a time to observe your creativity, to observe how you give of yourself in the world, whether that giving is through a creative process, through loving others, whatever it is. This fifth house is really about how and where you give most authentically of yourself. With Virgo in this area, for those of you with Taurus rising, you may tend toward a lot of perfectionism in this area or a lot of self-judgment. My creativity isn't good enough, or I don't love my children as much as I should, or, whatever it is. There may be a lot of criticism here. So you want to look at that and be aware of it and understand where you need to be untying those tight knots of over analysis and over judgment of yourself. In order to move forward, that's what you need to do. So, what are we moving forward toward as we're releasing this, Jenny?
Well, really, what you're trying to do is just open to that Piscean flow that's available in your 11th house. So, for you with Taurus rising, that means being open to the flow that's available in your community. That means being willing to witness the struggles, the suffering, the issues that are the emotional sensitivities that are showing themselves in your community, and be open to those. And be willing to, share your own vulnerability in that space and let go of your feelings of separateness, and really open to the community that's around you and being part of it. It's kind of like recognizing that you're just one wave in the ocean, and then the ocean is the community, right? So you're kind of seeing your participation rather than, as Lori was saying earlier, like than sort of getting all separate and tight, like, oh, I don't really give myself very well, or I don't have anything to really offer the community, and kind of being tight and judgmental. And it's like, well, nothing could be further from the truth. Like, you have a ton to offer in terms of practical wisdom and help and support, because you have Virgo in the fifth house. So that, 11th house, where the Pisces is and where Saturn is, like, that's the big lesson, is the surrender of the self to the group, the community that needs you, that you are part of,
Hmm.
and not having to be separate. So that's kind of what I see.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much here. You've been working to understand what community means to you for a couple of years now. This has been an area that has been under development in your life.
Yeah.
Right now, it's really about looking at the reality of the suffering within your community and softening yourself enough to understand it and prepare to take action when the time is right. Right now, you're really just working with developing the compassion, understanding it. And the other thing, the 11th house, I just want to add, the other thing about the 11th house um, is that it's where we receive from community. I like
Mhm.
thinking of this polarity as the fifth house giving love, the 11th house receiving love. You really, with Pisces there, it's a matter of, like you said, Jenny, releasing the ego in order to allow yourself to be supported
Mhm. Yeah.
and vice versa. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's,
And the thing you mentioned too about like how we already have Mercury which ironically is ruling that Virgo moon, but already in the 12th house, there could be a mistake being made here of like, oh, now's the time I got to do the thing. This is all about me. Like, I really need to like get on this. And that's actually not the real message, is just that kind of how you are, exactly as you said, Lori, receiving in groups and therefore participating and opening the way for other people. Like as you increase your consciousness in that area, you are opening the doors for other people around you, whether you know it or not. So
There's so much to be angry about right now in the
yeah,
world.
sure.
And those planets that have moved into Aries and are going to be moving back by retrograde into Pisces are a distraction right now.
Mhm.
Anger right at the moment is not going to be effective. It's going to just make more problems. Right now, we have to soften, get our ego out of the way. And then once what was it you said earlier?
What, the spiritual fortification?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's
Yep.
about fortifying yourself on a spiritual level in order for your action down the road a little bit um, to be effective.
Yeah.
When those planets turn direct, when Mercury and Venus turn direct and go back into Aries again,
Hmm.
no kidding, it's going to be time for action.
Yeah, and with Taurus rising too, you've got Aries in the house of selfless service. So you particularly are being called, towards that selfless action, when things do all move into Aries, when all those planets. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be a massive movement into Aries. It's
yeah.
going to be, Mercury and Venus, which are retrograde right now, will be moving back in there. Saturn, Neptune, we're going to have a lot of action. And right now is a time to fortify ourselves. Okay. Wild, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right.
Wow.
Gemini rising. We know a few people with this, don't we?
How we do. Personal people. All right, so those of you with Gemini rising, you have that, chatty, communicating, networking sign right there on your rising. So that's some of your character. And what that does is it places the Virgo lunar eclipse in your fourth house. The fourth house, you can't help but notice it's at the very bottom of the chart. It's the most private house in the whole thing here, the most personally private. So what this suggests is that there's a real need for you at this time during this lunar eclipse to examine the struggle with perfectionism. Is there something about self-judgment? Are you so critical of yourself that you almost cripple yourself emotionally? I mean, and maybe you're not that extreme, but this is the really important time to just look at those, because I think we all carry at least a trace of those types of things where we're very self-critical, especially if you're born female.
Mm.
But I think it does go with all of us. But anyway, like there's something here that really would behoove you to just examine kindly, take a look at it. The point is not to over scrutinize and then create more judgment, but to simply understand where are the places that you're kind of holding your emotional foundation a little bit too tight, that you're cutting yourself off from being in flow with all the things around you. Because, that fourth house really refers to your emotional foundation as far as the most psychological level. Um, Now, there are also much more external pieces. It is your house. It refers to your home. It also can refer to your connection with the land. So all of those places might be areas where you're also, it would help you to look at, are you being too rigid? Are you judging yourself in some way? Are you holding yourself to this higher level of expectation in your family life? Those are all questions to ask yourself, and just take a look at during the lunar eclipse. And that's the first part of this. And the reason you're doing that is so you can start really contending with the Pisces area of your life.
Yeah, so we're letting go of that perfectionism around family and home, and it can be family members too. There's some way that you're being super hypercritical in that area, and your job right now is to open up to your higher understanding of who you are in the outer world. This is over the last few years. you've been really in a position where you've been facing reality and making some pretty serious changes in your social reputation or your career. That's been a place of serious development. This is a time when you really are letting go of your ego in this area and facing the reality of how your social reputation or your career really needs to be a part of the higher collective. There has to be a connection to something deeper and more profound and more intangible than what you have been doing in that area.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, yeah, there's a release of ego. There's a tendency right now with Mercury and Venus currently in Aries. There's a tendency to be all hot under the collar and be distracted from this. But
Mhm.
right now, your job is to observe this polarity between home and career, between the root core of who you are and your social reputation. What is going on there? How are you releasing um, perfectionism in order to embrace flow and your own spiritual understanding that comes through your career in some way or your social reputation in some way. Um,
Yeah.
and that is the preparation for the future actions that need to be taken.
Hmm. Yeah, there's something, having Pisces in the 10th house. I mean, it's just maybe there's time, this is the time of really recognizing a level of selflessness or a spiritual component to whatever your most public face is, or where you are in your vocation or workplace. And it could be something, I mean, it doesn't mean that you have to have some lofty job. I mean, even just, being working at cash register or waiting tables or something like that, where this might show up, like you can bring that component of desiring to be caring of other people, paying attention to the sensitivities of others to any work that you do. And I think that that's part of the lesson. And Saturn is saying, hey, your work isn't about you and your ego. And hey, I'm showing up, look how I show up in public. It's really saying this deeper purpose of like, how do I help others? How do I be of service? How do I bring compassion to my work, whatever it is? So I think there's a message about that too, which I really like. I think about Gemini rising people that I know. It's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
and if it's interesting because I was talking to someone the other day with this setup that was really in this state of, you know, the guy has a really good job, makes a good paycheck, but he's like, what's it matter? What's the use of it? Who's it helping?
Yeah.
And really, if you find yourself in that state, this is a time that you are preparing on a spiritual level to make changes. It's not a time to make big changes. It's not a time to take action. Actually, the internal demand to take action is a fallacy right now. It's a distraction right now. Right now, you are preparing to take action once all these planets move into Aries over the next few months. But right now, this is spiritual preparation.
Nice.
Wow.
Excellent.
This is really powerful, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And it really links your personal work with your public work,
Yeah,
especially with the Gemini rising chart.
it's fascinating. Okay, we're going to go on to folks who have Cancer rising. I know a few of these people. So if you have Cancer rising, we all know people with Cancer rising are way sensitive, sensitive, sensitive people. And with this lunar eclipse falling across the axis between the sixth and the ninth house, the eclipse itself is highlighting that third house. There's a lot of tendency toward inner judgment around how you use your voice, how you speak, how you process information in your own mind. Um, look to Mercury in your own chart for more information. But, there tends to be a lot of ways that you might just kind of stop yourself because of these internal judgments.
Mm.
Um, so that's where this is happening because this is a eclipse and not just a full moon. This isn't a time to celebrate the gifts of Virgo in that third house. This is a time to observe where you're yeah, overanalyzing your own voice. And as you do that, where is this taking you? What is the direction that you need to be looking at from the point of that overanalysis, Jenny?
Well, this feels like a very personal question.
It is.
But yes, this is taking you to the idea that we are in, not only are we in Pisces season, that's where the sun has been for a few weeks, but also there's this much larger Pisces lesson. And essentially what this chart is asking is, how are those internal judgments blocking the way to your own wisdom, blocking the way to your ability to express yourself, because the ninth house is one of the self-expression houses, to express what you know and be willing to share your knowledge. I mean, this might be a time to be willing to step in a more kind of teaching role. That could be one thing. But really just opening to the grace of whatever's available in the ninth house and accepting the fact that you have Pisces here and that you have a lot of wisdom to share. So
Mhm.
this is a really important time to untangle those blocks that, that third house, I can just feel it so clearly of how it just, cuts you off at the knees and says, you don't have, you're not saying it the right way. You're not doing it the right way. You don't know how to, share this in the right way. So you might as well just forget it, you know, especially as a Cancer rising person where you have this real sensitivity and you don't know how to talk about it with people. It's really difficult. So that's really what's at hand here is this is a very important time to observe those blocks so that you can really open to this innate wisdom that you have. And with Saturn here, you are also being asked to surrender the ego in the name of that. So that, and when you do that, Saturn's going to help provide a very natural container for that. That you don't have to run around and do this all by yourself. Again, this is a time for observing, but this is a willingness to surrender to whatever that purpose is, a willingness to address the grief and the issues in the world, and develop an even deeper sense of compassion for what's happening, and really step into that. So yeah, that makes sense.
Isn't that fascinating? It's like you're all tied up with this judgment around your voice, and yet what you need to do is trust your ability to put it out there in the world, basically.
Yeah,
It's just trusting it. It's like, okay, show up in the class and teach the class, and don't worry if the slides aren't perfect. Who cares?
right.
That's not the point. You've got to get your ego out of the way and do what you need to do. And at this particular point in time with Mercury and Venus both in Aries and both either retrograde or ready to go retrograde, don't let your anger distract you from the fact that this point in time is about observing and strengthening your spiritual resolve and your spiritual understanding of what's going on in the world and what your role is, and preparing for actions that need to be taken over the next couple of months while these planets move into Aries. It's a powerful
Yeah.
time, and you are going to be asked to actively use your voice.
Yeah. And I think, what's interesting too is, I mean, one of my favorite, parts of Virgo is just the humility that comes with it.
Mm.
So there's a humbleness, there's a humbling of how you move about. Like the third house is the local environment. So there's a sort of a humility that comes from maybe sort of seeing yourself in the common person and in reverse. So really seeing that kind of feeling as you walk around your neighborhood and you see you see the person delivering your mail, or at least as long as there's a USPS. But anyway, um,
Right.
just that you're kind of, you're able to see yourself in the other and bring in there's a humbling that can be incredibly helpful of sort of going, oh yeah, I don't need to be in my own way here. I can just do the thing that I can offer to other people.
Yeah.
So,
That's beautiful. Okay, we're going to move on then to folks with Leo rising.
alrighty. So if you have Leo rising, yeah, this one makes a lot of sense to me because like if you have Leo rising, that means you have this big, bold fire sign that likes to be the center of attention and walk into the room and everybody kind of looks, and actually even if you don't like that, it's too bad because it's what you have. Um, but what's really interesting is Leo, deep down in the core of Leo, its biggest struggle is with insecurity. And it's sort of unsurprising when you recognize that that sign of Virgo that can be prone to lots of self-judgment and criticism and a desire for some sort of perfectionism falls in your second house of how you feel about yourself, of your self-esteem, of how you're able to value yourself. So there's this, you know, tender Virgo there, really just that's the thing that this lunar eclipse is really illuminating. So this is a really important time for you to ask yourself, well, about your relationship with your own self-esteem, your relationship with yourself. Like, how do you value yourself? Are there things that you do, or is there negative talk that you sort of beat yourself up with, or is there judgment and criticism that really holds you back? That's kind of the biggest question on a psychological level. The second house, that we always talk about also refers to money, your finances, your possessions. And in a nutshell, all of your resources. So it's also a really important time to look at what is your relationship with those? Do you have judgments about the way you spend money? Do you feel like you should be giving more or giving less? Are you too indulgent? What is the relationship there? So those are the questions to really get at. If you have Leo rising, because those are the things that are ultimately at the source of whatever struggles with insecurity you might have. So that's the kind of the keynote of this moment in time. It's a process that's going to unfold over the next 6 months. And it also involves, your ability to have compassion for other people and their issues. And, Lori, what's that about? What's the eighth house where Pisces is telling us here?
Yeah, it's really interesting because that eighth house is, it's the polarity to the second house. It's other people's values, other people's deep concerns. So with Pisces there, Saturn's been in there for quite a while now. You've been really working hard to understand your own responses and reactions to the um, deeper levels of relationships with other people where we really bump into their problems, their issues. So this is a time where as you release your own judgment of your values, as you release that, it enables you to really open yourself up to empathy for other people, to compassion, to seeing, really when you get out of your own way of analyzing your own values, you can see that other people are suffering from the space of their own values. And you can choose to kind of let go of your ego enough to really be supportive of other people, really see what they're going through and develop compassion. There is, of course, with Mercury and Venus both all at this point in Aries, um, retrograde. I think one of them, Mercury, is going retrograde the day after this, but they're both going to retrograde back into this area. Right now, they're both in Aries. There is a way in which, the world is making us all a little crazy, and you probably have this like anger built up and you want to take action, but this is not the time to take action yet. That's a distraction. Right now is a time to really sink into your spiritual ability to let go of your ego and see other people suffering and develop compassion in preparation for the action that you will be taking as all of these planets move back into Aries
Yeah.
over the coming months.
Yeah, the other thing I was just thinking about as you were, which is great what you just said. The thing that's funny here is the second house, to me, the skill that you need to develop to navigate that Virgo second house is self-love. And there's a lot of misunderstanding about self-love. I feel like, some I've seen in popular culture just this painting of self-love as being this sort of selfish, selfish thing where you're just thinking about you. And it's like, but it's totally the opposite because self-love is what undoes the kind of negative ego state. I mean, if you're beating yourself up and making yourself small and keeping yourself in this space, like you are not going to be able to open to the issues of other people. You're not going to be able to develop that deeper sense of compassion. So it's just, the idea that the more that you are able to kind of cut through that for yourself and realize how worthy you are of love, the more you're going to be able to pass that on to other people and to show them that they're worthy of love, just by that simple act. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about that. I know a lot of spiritual communities are addressing that too, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But it's, having that ego can be reverse ego, where if you're holding yourself small, you're making other people small.
Hmm.
So that's kind of where you want to really expand and grow and cut through those Virgo blocks. So
Yeah. It's fascinating. Okay, let's move on to folks who have Virgo rising. So if you've got Virgo rising, this lunar eclipse is very personal. Yeah, people with Virgo rising have all the gifts and the struggles of Virgo right on their sleeve. They wear it on their sleeve. They have that service component. They want to, be of service to people. You can see that in these people with Virgo rising. You can also, if you look a little tiny bit below the surface, you'll see how they have a tendency to be very self-critical, to do a lot of navel gazing, of analyzing the self. And every time you walk out the door, you have to analyze whether you look right or act right or whatever. There's that. So with this focus of this eclipse in this first house, that's what you really have to observe. Again, this is a eclipse. It's not just a full moon. It's not a time to celebrate the self, which a normal full moon here would be. This is a time to observe how you hold yourself in these tight knots of expecting perfection of yourself, possibly working yourself half to death because you're trying to make everything perfect. So this is the time to really observe that and think about, is that serving you? Is that serving the people in your life, particularly the people who you are in one-on-one relationships with? And that brings us to the Pisces. You want to talk about that piece, Jenny?
yes,
I think you know somebody with this.
I know. Yes, I do. I know several people, one of them in particular. Uh, but yes, the Pisces in the seventh house, and this one's so straightforward because the first and the seventh house polarity really just deals with self and other in a very simple way. And, a lot of how we learn about ourselves are through other people, our relationships, especially our intimate ones. They are mirrors. So there's this real mirroring that happens between the first and the seventh. So in a nutshell, it's sort of like if you're doing a lot of judging of yourself, whether you know it or not, you're extending that judgment to people that you're sitting in one-on-one connection with, because you're mirrors, so if you're judging yourself, then your reflection is also showing you judging yourself. So there's a way in which that this undoing of the knot that Laurie talked about, of this, oh, am I doing it the right way, is this how everyone else is doing it, is this okay, by working on that, you're giving permission to allow anyone you're in relationship with to be however they are, to be in the moment, to be, if they're experiencing some of the emotions that Pisces suggests, like grief and disappointment and, you know, um, or on the other hand, like transcendent love, it's just like you're granting permission to everyone around you to just be in that flow, to experience that flow, to be who they are. I mean, and that's what I see. And that's what the work is, the whole idea that you observe this in yourself, and you're just opening the doors, for yourself and for other people through that seventh house where Pisces is, and the fact that Saturn is there is just a big hello to, you know, this isn't about the personal self all the time, that you can just release that You can release the ego concerns of, wait, if my partner's not acting the right way, then who the heck am I? And like maybe trying to, you know, get them to act in a different way. It's like releasing all that. You don't have to do that. So I think that's a big message of this one. And although we're talking about this in a very personal way, this is lands in the broader context. I mean, the first house is a very powerful house. The seventh house is everybody you come into contact with, you know, on a daily and regular basis. So this work is very important for those with Virgo rising, because you're really providing permission for everybody to just step into a more profound level of consciousness.
I have to laugh because this one is mine. And I'm just reading that book. I don't know how many of you know of it, but do you, Jenny, know who Mel Robbins is?
Oh yeah, I do. Yes.
Well, I'm reading her book, Let Them.
Oh yeah.
And it's like,
Oh.
how perfect is that? So
Mhm.
anyone with Saturn moving through the seventh house in Pisces should be reading that Let Them Theory book by Mel Robbins. I would bet that she has a Virgo rising. I would bet that she does. But the only other thing I wanted to add was, this is we want to be really careful not to be distracted by anger,
Mhm.
particularly anger at um, the people in our lives, the deeper levels of those relationships. We really want to be careful not to be distracted by action because it's not time to take, yeah, not to be distracted by anger because it's not time to take action right now. Right now is a time to be deepening your connection to compassion for the people that are right in front of you, whether it's your partner or people as a whole that you encounter. So there's that.
Yeah. It's the
Yeah,
unlocking of empathy, right?
exactly. Exactly. I want to, hmm, how did that?
I know I saw a little menu pop up.
Did you? Well, I'm trying to do something here, and for some reason, it's got the wrong window open. But we are back on it, and we're going to folks who have Libra rising.
Ooh la la. Okay, those of you with Libra rising, let's first talk about where the actual lunar eclipse is landing. For you, it's landing in the 12th house. I probably say this every time we come to the 12th house, but I'll say again, the 12th house is one of the hardest houses to talk about because it really talks about, it describes the unseen. It describes these much greater forces than ourselves. It makes a reference to our own unconsciousness. Being unconscious is just part of the human condition. We will always have levels of unconsciousness. And that's what the 12th house really refers to. So, what's really kind of ironic here is that, you have Virgo in the 12th house. So, there's a way in which things that are hidden from you that hold you back. So, I think part of your unconscious patterns that you need to be willing to examine during this lunar eclipse is what holds you back, what kinds of self-judgments, what kinds of perfectionism or struggles with perfectionism might you have that ultimately have a chokehold on you and sort of cut you off from the ability to just be in flow in your life. That's a lot of what the question is. Now because it's the 12th house, it's hard to see. But I think part of what's cool about a lunar eclipse is it has this kind of reddish hue, and it shows things that you can't normally see. So I think the lunar eclipse is sort of saying, hey, you have this opportunity to look into your hidden psyche that you can't quite see. You're going to get to see stuff you can't always see. It's a wonderful opportunity for that. The 12th house is also the house of self undoing. It's the place where we are our own worst enemy. And a lot of it is when we aren't, I guess, attempting to look at our own unconsciousness, that it ends up just kind of running us and ruling us. And so the big question here is for you just to simply ask yourself, is there judgment, criticism, perfectionism that has a hold on me, that colors everything that I do and is reaching out from behind the curtain to control most of my life? That's the big heavy question.
Yeah.
But that's a lot of what the lunar eclipse is bringing. So I guess the other piece of this is that you can't have a lunar eclipse unless you have a sun opposite it, illuminating it. So the other things we need to take into account here are Pisces, and we want to look at where the Pisces lands in your life, and for you that is in the sixth house of routines and practices. So Lori, what does that bring into this equation here? How does that fit?
It's really interesting to think about being judgmental about your own hidden side. I mean, you can't see it. It's hard to see it.
Mhm.
It really suggests that you really need to pay attention to your mental health, to your
Mhm.
physical health, how they're connected. And this is one of the things that you're really observing at this time is how your hidden judgments are impacting your physical health. Over the past few years, you've probably been doing a certain amount of work, facing reality about what your physical health is, the ways that you manage your day-to-day routines, your lifestyle itself. But there's a way in which it's really important for you to be releasing all of that self inner judgment in order to allow yourself to kind of find a more spiritual flow for your routines. That's really where you need to go. Whatever you do on the level of routines, you want to find a way to engage it spiritually, engage it on a level of empathy for yourself, for what your health issues are. This is kind of really personal, isn't
Yeah,
it? In a funny way. It's not personal like the first house, but it's personal like this real internal process
yeah.
that is showing you what needs to um releasing all that tight knots of self-analysis in
Mm.
order to allow your day-to-day life to just be compassionate in what you can and can't do. Huh.
Well, I always think about, that Pisces in the sixth house, and I'm sure I've said this before, but there's a real need for that touch of magic in the daily life, or the touch of the transcendent. Or so I
Yeah.
think of this as like, a Libra rising person really needs to have a spiritual life, whether that's just reading a little bit of poetry to just lift you up, or I think about, maybe somebody who loves to get out on a kayak or on a snowboard or something where they can really be in a watery flow space, um, and just feel flow. I think it's really necessary for Libra rising person in order to do this dance,
Yeah.
especially if you have Virgo or Pisces placements in your chart. Those that's really going to highlight it. But that's what I end up thinking, and I think you're right, Lori. There's a real inward process feeling to this one. It's really about your own practices, your own need to have some kind of spiritual practice in a nutshell, whatever that is.
It's really interesting because I think of a particular person with this one, and this person would tell you they don't believe anything spiritual, nothing. And, so just because of that, I want to highlight what you said about poetry
Mhm.
or going for a kayak ride. It doesn't have to be spirituality that involves some angels or
It's
gods or
yeah,
anything like that. It can
yeah,
be, all of those things that bring us to transcendence. It can be music, it can be poetry, it can be, an art project, it can be, any project that you do that puts you in a flow state.
yeah.
You might, make soap, whatever it is, a process that puts you into a state that you are separate from your ego in.
Mm,
It's about releasing your ego in that state of your day-to-day routines. I think about, people who do walking meditation, just like allowing themselves to release the ego in different areas of their lives. I think that's what's really important. And I also want to reiterate the thing about the Mercury and Venus currently being in Aries. And you want to be really careful, those of you with Aries rising, that anger toward a partner or toward any other, that anger does not get in the way of you looking at this internal process that you're in the middle of. That you don't feel like you have to take action because you're angry at your partner or whoever, that you allow yourself to fortify yourself on this deeper level, taking action on relationship issues of any sort will have their time later. Right now, this is about fortifying yourself.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. Okay.
Hmm.
All right, let's move
Okay.
on to folks who have Scorpio rising. If you have Scorpio rising, this full moon lunar eclipse is happening in your 11th house. So, the 11th house, we talk about it as community, not necessarily a group of friends, but the wider community that supports you to your desires. That's how I think of it. I think those are the exact words I learned back in 100 years ago about the 11th house. But it really is, it's like-minded others. So this is an area for people with Scorpio rising who, on a personality level, you're very intense, you're very dynamic and intense and deep. But when it comes to the communities that you exist within or observe, you tend to be really perfectionistic. You want things to be a certain way. There can be real tendencies of analyzing and judging communities. So, this is something that you really want to observe right now. There's no action that needs to be taken at this time. You want to observe where you may get tied up in analyzing different communities. So that's where the eclipse is showing up.
Mm.
Now, on the other end of this, we want to think about what's being, as we are releasing this perfectionism. The whole point is to release that perfectionism and that self-analysis or that analysis of the community. So, what are we replacing it with? What are we moving toward? What's the important path of this eclipse, Jenny? What do you want to say about Pisces?
Well, for Scorpio rising people, Pisces is in the fifth house. So that's very much part and parcel of the self-expression. First and fifth house really work together. And so the fifth is how you give of yourself. And so I think it's allowing yourself to open and give of yourself without fear, without suspicion that the Scorpio rising suggests, but to say, hey, I've undone these blocks, these judgments that have to do with my fear of the way I give of myself, the fear of how how I show up in community. And so what you're really doing is opening up those floodgates of how you share your love, of saying, oh, I can just do this. I don't need to worry about, I'm going to be taken advantage of, or I'm going to be giving too much, because you are trusting that more Virgo part of yourself to help you with boundaries and so on, so that you can just, express this love, to just share it. So I think that's the big thing with Saturn in the mix too. Saturn's been in Pisces for a while, so there's been a longer term lesson here for sure. But during this lunar eclipse, Saturn is really asking you to relinquish your ego and to not, even though it's a house of self expression, it's not, deeply tied with your egoic self. It's tied to your capital S self and
Mhm.
your ability to just be open to compassion, be open to, giving of yourself regardless of the mood states and so on of other people. So it it's something along all those lines. That's how I think of it. But yeah, um,
Yeah, I like that. I think, it's really bringing in this idea of really looking at yeah, how do you give love without
Mm.
an ego attachment? How do you give of yourself from that spiritual level? The other thing that we've been talking about is the fact that Aries and Venus are both Aries and Venus, excuse me. Mercury and Venus are both in Aries, kind of distracting us from what we need to be doing, kind of distracting us with anger. And, we're all kind of feel like deer in the headlights with all that's going on in the world right now. And there's a lot of anger that can build up and this feeling like we have to take action right now. Well, those planets, Venus is already retrograde, Mercury goes retrograde, I think, right after this. And they're both coming back into Pisces. They're going to go direct right about the same degree of where this eclipse is happening. So it's not time to take action. Don't let the anger that's building in you distract you from the fact that right now the process is about learning to bring compassion to your love. That's really, it's like letting go of the perfectionism of how you receive, allowing yourself to develop compassion in how you give. And that's what you are learning right now. That's what you need to be observing. And that is preparation for the action that you will be taking once these planets really get back into Aries in forward motion, along with all the planets that are going into Aries
Yeah.
later this spring.
Yeah. I mean, I think with Scorpio rising, in a nutshell, as I'm going to say, sort of in summary, is I do think you need the discernment of the Virgo in the 11th house in order to understand how to give of yourself, because I think there's also a tendency to over give here, and being cognizant of the Virgo part of yourself is going to allow you to just trust boundaries, set boundaries, and trust them and channel it. I think that's an important thing, because otherwise,
Yeah.
Scorpio rising, you can get resentful real quick.
Yeah.
So tuning into, like, if you're resentful, if you're feeling resentful, that's a clue that you need to kind of look at that Pisces Virgo
Huh.
area
Interesting.
more
Yeah,
more
I like
heavily.
that.
So yeah.
Okay,
All
let's
right.
move on to folks who have Sagittarius rising.
All right. So those of you who have the fire sign of Sagittarius rising, what happens with this lunar eclipse is that your attention really gets focused onto your 10th house of career. That's where the lunar eclipse is going to land. So what that is immediately going to bring to your attention is, areas where you have a tendency towards, especially perfectionism, places where maybe you're very critical of your work in your professional life, or very concerned about how you show up in public, because the 10th house is your profession. It's also how you show up in public. So there's something about those topics that are going to be illuminated during this lunar eclipse. So asking yourself, am I harsh with myself in my performance, in my work life? Am I overly perfectionistic and concerned about the way I'm showing up in public? I mean, those are really the two key questions that this lunar eclipse is bringing up, because you really want to observe where these things might be issues for you, because there's a deeper question that's brewing. We're in a full moon, so we're looking at the polarity. And the other half of this equation is where Pisces is in your chart. So however you're showing up in your more public professional life, and the problems that are showing up there are actually very connected to your home and family life.
Mhm.
So what's that about, Lori? How does that pop up here?
Well, it's really interesting because this is a South Node lunar eclipse, as you are releasing that perfectionism of how you show up in the world, your reputation or stuff in your career, as you're releasing that, what it is doing is pushing your attention down to how much compassion do you have for your home and family? I think we can think of it very simply in that way. This
Mhm.
area, the fourth house where you have Pisces, you know, people with Sagittarius rising are very gregarious, outward kind of people. But when it comes to home and family, there's such a tenderness, such a understanding of compassion that is developed in this area. And this area has been really an area of development over the last few years with Saturn moving through there. And right now, it's really important that you really focus on understanding the suffering of your family members, maybe the members of your childhood family, your home, maybe the suffering of your ancestors comes up. Maybe there's something for you to learn through the suffering of your ancestors, some way of tapping into a deep level of compassion in that area of home and family. So you want to make sure you're not distracted by anger. I think
Mhm.
that's a really important piece here. Right now, there is a tendency because Mercury and Venus are both in Aries, and there's a lot to be angry about if we look around in the world. But right at this moment in time, it is necessary that we observe the polarity of this eclipse rather than get distracted by the anger that I think is purposefully trying to pull us off course. Right now, we need to fortify our spiritual level in order to take the actions necessary shortly as all these planets move into Aries.
Nice. Yeah, I think you covered it. I don't have too much to add. I like you brought the Aries piece in there. It's good. Yeah.
Yeah, let's move on then to folks who have Capricorn rising. And if you have Capricorn rising, this full moon lunar eclipse is happening in your ninth house. You know, people with Capricorn rising, ooh, serious people. They take life very seriously. And when it comes to the ninth house, I think of primarily as our world view, our understanding of bigger world pictures. You know, you can think of the ninth house as, yeah, worldview. It's all the things that make up our worldview, education, travel, et cetera, et cetera. But that area is a place where you might be very tight in your opinions, ideas, your understanding of bigger world pictures may be some judgment there. Judgment on your own worldview, judgment on what you see in the bigger world. I'm not exactly sure. You know, if you've got Capricorn rising, you probably know. But there's some way in which this area is kind of tightly bound up with judgment and not a lot of kindness. You know, it's the negative side of Virgo. You know, the positive side of Virgo is all about kindness. But right now, with this, because it's an eclipse, a lunar eclipse, because it's a South Node eclipse, there's the negativity we need to look at right now. So, where are you tight in your worldview? Where do you need to release your judgments there? And as you do that, it's enabling you to open up to a place where you're developing compassion. You want to take it from there, Jenny?
Yeah, well, I think yes, like the interesting backdrop is that we are in Pisces season. So we've had, various conversations about Pisces in the third house. And for you as a Capricorn rising person, this simply suggests that you have a lot of potential for empathy and compassion towards the common person that the neighbor that you run into, the person, the cashier at the grocery store, the person delivering your mail. I mean, it's a really it really suggests that you have the ability to access this like profound compassion, for people in your immediate environment. And that is a huge gift. And so,
Mhm.
what is really being asked of you during this lunar eclipse is to let go of whatever that judgment is, the sort of, I think the word that came to mind for me was persnickety. The like, detail oriented, like expectation of the world being a certain way, or expectation of yourself, sharing your worldview being this kind of very detail oriented thing. I mean, the idea is to release those issues that you may have in order to further step into that potential of being completely compassionate towards the average Joe in the street. I mean, and maybe even to be able to have profound conversations with what people are struggling with, the grief, the disappointment, the crushing of expectations that people might be dealing with right now. So it's really just making you available for those daily conversations that, quite frankly, can have just an enormous impact. I mean, you might not think that little conversation you had with that person, that you ran into on the corner store is that important, but it really actually carries a lot of power, because it really brings in that ability for compassion right to the local level. I mean, right to the most basic common person level. So that's really why it's so important to think about, what judgments are blocking you, because it's blocking your ability to share this gift. And with Saturn in the mix here that we have on these charts in the third house, you've been getting a lot of lessons about sharing your voice, about speaking your truth. And there's a real selflessness that is coming into it in these sort of final, phases of all these planets being in Pisces. I mean, this is a longer process that's unfolding over certainly the next 6 months, but also over the next year. So there's that's the goal. So, I mean, there's not really a goal at the lunar eclipse. You're really just observing, but that's really what you're taking that, ego out of anything that has to do with how you communicate with people on the local level, releasing the ego, and allowing that compassion to flow and letting other people see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. The only other thing I want to add to that is that if you're finding yourself right now in this period of time really holding a lot of anger around family members, perhaps, just know that that's a distraction. Those planets that have already gone into Aries are a bit of a distraction right now. They're going retrograde. We're all going to be examining how we've been thinking about things, what our values are. But this is a time to really not let yourself be distracted by anger and allow yourself to go into this process of understanding the the suffering of the people in your immediate environment and how to bring compassion there.
Yeah, as you said, that was like, it'd be really easy to be really pissed off at your family members who you really just do not like their politics, and you just
Right.
see them as part of the problem. And also, so that's one piece. And then the third house is like, okay, what about the other relatives? The cousins, the siblings,
Right.
and really just focusing on how do you broaden compassion rather than scream at the person you're just really fed up with because they just don't get what's happening right now, right? So
Yeah.
anyway, it's my
Yeah.
comment.
It's fascinating. Okay, we're going to move on then to folks with Aquarius rising.
Okay. So those of you with Aquarius rising, let's first talk about where the lunar eclipse is landing. It's in Virgo, so it's landing in your eighth house. The eighth house was a very interesting house to me. It's the house of the occult. It's the house where you might need to develop rituals to kind of help you manage things. It's the house of contracts, where you sort of get into these deeper levels of people's values and
Mm.
resources, and you kind of in the eighth house is that's where you start understanding like other people's deeper agendas that maybe you didn't see at first, and maybe they don't even know about, because it's always like some unconsciousness here.
Mm.
So the lunar eclipse is really illuminating the tricky little snags and issues that occur in your eighth house, where you are either being very judgmental of yourself and how you handle other people, and not really wanting to deal with it, or you might also just be very, picky and kind of picking out like other people's issues and just kind of being like, oh, you just need to get over that or whatever. And so
Hmm.
you need to ask yourself, that's the first question, is where are these issues popping up? Like, are there issues that have to do with perfectionism and needing other people to be perfect, or with judgments or criticism that really block your way of handling other people's issues? So that's kind of the central question the eclipse is bringing. This is a longer process. We are in Pisces season, and also this is an eclipse. So we're looking at least 6 months out from this. This is a longer process of releasing these types of blocks. And in the meantime, really need to look at the Pisces area of life too, because that is really showing you, why are we trying to release these blocks? Like, why does it matter? What are we trying to open to, Lori?
Well, we're trying to open to a deeper understanding and appreciation for our own level of suffering and need for compassion. Around, the second house is personal values. We can look at it in several different ways. You can look at it as values, you can look at it as money, resources, and personal value. When your bank account is empty, your valuing of yourself is difficult to navigate. Okay. So that's why these things kind of come together here. And this might be playing out in different ways, but basically, bottom line, it's telling you to look at what your values are, really examine, get your ego out of the way, get your ego out of your conversation about money, get your ego out of your conversation about, what car you drive, what house you live in, and in combination with that, your own valuing of yourself. So you've got to get your ego out of that and really develop compassion for your own suffering. And that is going to really allow you, that area has been a place where you've been working pretty hard for a couple of years now. You've been really doing a lot of development in kind of structuring this area in a way to support your understanding of money, resources, self-worth. So as you release those demands and expectations of how other people manage their money, resources, self-worth, this allows you to understand your own and to work with that. In the meantime, don't let anger get in the way. Anger right now, I think for all of us is a distraction. Mercury and Venus are both currently in Aries. They're going to be backing back up. And then everything's going to go into Aries the later in the spring, boom, boom, boom. And then it'll be time for action. Right now, it's time to fortify yourself in terms of self-compassion. Bottom line, that's what I think.
Yeah. I think just with this one, the last thing I'll add is you're laying the groundwork because the second and the eighth house are pretty internal houses. So you're laying the groundwork of, you're, as we're talking about, the spiritual fortification, but that has to do with your values and your resources that is going to enable you to step forward and use your voice in a warrior-like way that you will need to do later on. So
Yes,
laying the
yes. And it's your voice you're going to be needing to take action with, definitely. Thanks. Okay, so then we're going to move on to folks who have Pisces rising. Okay, if you've got Pisces rising, the eclipse itself is happening in your seventh house. And yeah, this one's pretty direct. Okay, so, what is it? Wherever this eclipse is happening, first of all, in a normal full moon, this would be a time to celebrate your relationships, right? A normal full moon in the seventh house. But this is not a normal full moon. This is a lunar eclipse, a South Node lunar eclipse. This is a time when you really need to open up your understanding, work with yourself, and look at how you approach your relationships, how you may have this unfortunate tendency to be very critical, judgmental, and analytical around. It can go several different ways. It can be that all those judgments go directly on a partner. It can also be you're judging yourself for who you are as a partner. So it can be going um, both ways, probably on that. But your job right now with this lunar eclipse is to really observe. Basically, with an eclipse, you're not taking action, you're observing. You want to observe how you are critical in that area. And yeah, begin to really contemplate how you're going to untie those knots and release those unnecessary and unattainable expectations of partnership.
Mm.
And then, as you're releasing that, what's the purpose of releasing that? Jennie, what's the purpose of releasing that?
It's pretty straightforward with Pisces rising. As a Pisces rising person, a huge part of your life path is about opening to compassion, is about helping other people, being of service, and sort of opening up the way towards being compassionate, being empathetic, being transcending the pokiness of the Virgo in the like poking at people in the seventh house. I mean, that's really, this is really the whole thing. This is very important for those of you with Pisces rising because, with Saturn in the first house for a while now, you've had a lot of lessons around what it means to really walk in the world as a person who has this very sensitive water sign right on the sleeve. You're a person who is offering the potential for leadership via compassion, which is totally revolutionary in the climate we're living in right now. So that is no small task. But that is really the whole idea. And you're really getting to see by whatever those kind of tight, like rigid expectations that you show people in those one-on-one relationships. I mean, that is really giving you information about what you need to release in order to step into this much more intuitive way of conducting your life. And when you do that, it means that the Virgo in the seventh house will actually turn into this ability to just have really good boundaries in your relationship. It'll give you, the keen discernment you need of, when to have the hard conversation or when to, do whatever it is that you need to do in your relationship. I mean, that's what you really are working towards. But the first step at this lunar eclipse is observing that, is just observing that whatever those issues are that are coming up in your partnerships. And the other thing that Laurie and I've been talking about is that right now there is a couple of planets in Aries. Venus is retrograde in Aries. Mercury's about to turn retrograde in Aries. And what this is saying is don't get fooled by feeling a lot of anger about your financial situation or even about how you feel about yourself. Because those planets are also, they're going backwards. So they also are going to be revisiting that deep, compassionate place. That is really the main focus right now. That's really what the task is because we're getting ready for big change. And your job is to kind of clear off those judgments, clear off that need for perfectionism, and really open to compassion because we're going to need a whole lot more of that as we're moving forwards. And you are a person who is a beacon for that type of energy. So,
Absolutely. I think that's really important. And I think that's really great. And I think we covered it all. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen. And the one thing I do want to say here at the end is I would really encourage you, if you have not watched the video that we did about Mercury and Venus retrograde, watch that one next. That will help you understand, this area where the anger is going on and how it's coming back in the retrograde motion and into Pisces from Aries. So watch that one, and we will see you at the next video. Anything else you want to drop in here, Jennie?
well, just that really, goes with this idea of spiritual fortification. Now's the time to really develop the spiritual pieces, the underlying things, so that when we're ready to step into those Aries components, we're ready, we're prepared, and we have compassion. That's it.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Jennie. And we'll be back again soon, everyone.
Thank you, Laurie.